Hello, ideaXme listeners. Anna Guzman, Space Ambassador here. Today I have for you a very interesting and informative interview with John Vickers, CEO of Blue Abyss in the UK. As interest for commercial space travel increases in the private sector, training space tourists for their adventure will become more necessary. Find out how John and his team at Blue Abyss are preparing to provide these services and how they will contribute to the growing sector of commercial human spaceflight. Hello, John. Good afternoon. Thanks for meeting with me this afternoon for a chat about Blue Abyss and what you guys are doing.
Good afternoon, Anna. My pleasure. Thank you.
Please tell our listeners, who are you?
So my name is John Vickers. I'm the founder and chief executive of a company called Blue Abyss.
I've looked at your website here at Blue Abyss. This seems very interesting. It's a training facility for astronauts.
It is, Anna. Actually, it's a facility from the outset. We've talked about being the world's first fully capable astronaut training centre, but also because of the nature of the business and because at the time when I started in 2014, we felt that just training astronauts didn't necessarily have the ring of, wow, this will be busy all the time. It's always been a marine space facility for training, for research, for development purposes, for experiences, for young people, for government, for private sector, whomever. Anywhere where you want to get exposure to extreme environments to carry out, as I say, testing, research and development, that's what we want to cater for.
So is the focus of the training heavily on like deep sea diving or experience in the diving extreme environment to get people their bodies accustomed to something equivalent to maybe space travel?
So the only three-dimensional medium that we have here on Earth for use for prolonged periods of time to equate to space, to give you that sense of, floating around, is water. So in a second way, if you like, if the business wasn't just predicated on space because we didn't know what the economy would look like for just a space training business, the fact that water is actually the link between where we live on Earth and going into space makes a nice sort of second string to the bow, if you like. Water is... Of course, water is dense. There's a vacuum in space. Water, tends to be, there's a resistance to it. And there's a sense that you're not quite actually floating. But nevertheless, we can mitigate against that. And for me, it was always about trying to, in the same way that the Russian Space Agency, the European Space Agency, NASA, have done for now decades. They use water as an approximation of what it would be like to do a spacewalk. So to go onto the International Space Station, astronauts train, for instance, Houston at the Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory. And for every hour they're going to do on a space station spacewalk, they do 7 hours in the pool. So you see that there must be something valid for spending that amount of time. For every, if the spacewalk is 7 hours, you're going to spend 49 hours in a pool. It's that minutiae of detail and that getting people ready for the sensory feeling of, right, I've got to move gently. I've got to predetermine which handhold I'm going to use. I'm going to make sure I'm clipped on all the time. And whilst there's a false element to it, you tend to have a safety diver, a film diver, and a gopher diver, somebody to deliver equipment to you. So you can swap between the tools that you're carrying around, which just simulate you carrying them around, and then the actual working tool. I think we can take that a stage further. But at the same time, that water gives people the opportunity to practice, to experience what it's like. Not least, I suspect, because, on a 7 or 8 hour spacewalk, if you're a scuba diver, you know what that sense of being inside a mask can feel like the very first time.
Yeah.
The average scuba dive, 40 minutes, an hour. You imagine living in a suit where there's, a little bit more room around your face, but you're going to spend perhaps 7, 8, 9 hours like that. You really have to discipline yourself and make sure that people are prepared for the sensory deprivation. Itchy nose, runny eye, something leaking, something going wrong, and you are completely, isolated. There's one other person outside with you, and it took you 2 hours to get ready for the spacewalk. So that pre-effort that you do in the pool is huge, and I don't think necessarily that sticks out in people's minds. They think going into space, perhaps, or when you watch a film, people just put on a suit and leave the spacecraft.
Yeah, it's not that easy.
No, and so I think we're looking to update the training. Bring it to a wider audience, hopefully enhance what governments do at the same time, make an appeal to governments to say, you've been doing this training historically, perhaps it's time to look at newer, more modern, more capable facilities for the next iteration, lunar orbiting platform, moon missions, such that government agencies, not just in the US, but globally, would be able to say, actually, why do we run our own pool? In the same way that the US has led on, they've outsourced the delivery of rockets and just buy the space that they need. I want that launch for this purpose. We think that the training will go the same way.
And the pool is currently under construction, or has the construction completed?
No, so we're about to start. We're about 3 weeks away at the moment from submitting our planning application. The site in the UK, in the northwest, a place called the Wirral, which is just opposite that very famous, if you've seen it, the very famous Liverpool skyline. We're on the opposite bank of that, part of a much wider regeneration project, which is nice to be involved with, actually, because it's not only what we're doing we think is exciting, but being able to be part of a kernel of a much wider regeneration in a slightly deprived area always feels good.
And I saw the specs. It's you all are planning to make the pool bigger than the NBL here in Houston?
So the pool will be 50, if we talk metric for a second, 50 meters. So what's that? 167 feet long. So Olympic pool's worth of length. Just slightly shorter in terms of width. So 40 meters, so 150 odd feet wide. The NASA's pool is 62 meters, so it's slightly longer. 32 meters wide, so it's slightly narrower. And whereas the NBL is one depth, it's about 47 feet, 12 meters. Our pool will be multiple levels down to a maximum depth of 50 meters, so 167 feet deep.
Wow. And what do you plan to have inside the pool? Some kind of mock-ups similar to that of the space station, or?
We've never actually, because of the timing, and we never thought that we would try and interfere with the training for the space station. Of course, if it's appropriate and we obtain permission, then there would be no harm in creating mock-ups that replicate that. From an experiential point of view, for private individuals saying, look, I'd love to know what it's like to go and do a spacewalk around the ISS, well, you could put those in. The idea is to continue during the build phase to work with private space companies and government agencies and say, look, you can now, because the UK is the first of what we're looking at already are 3 different centres. So one in the UK, one in the Middle East, one in the US. And to have a capability to put, like NASA does, like the Russians do, to put whatever you require. The reason for an amount of depth in the pool is to be able to put an object in and then enable somebody to go all the way around it. So you get that 3-dimensional, okay, now I know what it looks like to be on the other side of this thing, and I haven't got to go out of the water to do it. So we're mimicking that. But because there are different levels, we can do different things. So it doesn't have to be a mock-up at the space station. It could be a crew capsule, and you could find out what it would be like to land on water and how you'd get out. And for instance, if you were delayed in getting picked up, what would that experience be like? It could be the next iteration of space stations. It could be a space hotel mock-up. Everything to just give people, as I said earlier, I think most astronauts who train, if fail's the wrong word, but if they don't make grade, perhaps, become an astronaut, it's not necessarily because they're not clever people. Astronauts typically are very clever people, and the people that apply tend to be very clever people. They tend to be very fit. But I think that most people would find that dividing line being their psychological resilience to stress. And water, and as an extreme environment, putting somebody in water, and I said it, in a mask, in a confined environment, is a good starting point for part of that psychological resilience analysis of somebody. If you're going to take, it's one thing to take ex-test pilots or people who've had very focused, very disciplined careers. If you take members of the public and say, right, we're going to send you into space, and there's a space hotel or something to go and to experience up there, I think we need to make sure, without the 18 months worth of training that you give a government astronaut, you're going to pretty quickly have to validate that those individuals can stand up to the fact that, well, there's me and there's 3 other people in this capsule. We're going up. It's very small. It's very cramped. It's suddenly hot. It's very noisy. How are people going to react? And if you put them on a space hotel for a week, for instance, how do you know that in the middle of the night somebody's not going to freak out? Well, we can mimic all of that to a degree in water. If you want to go outside, you're going to have to put a suit on, a helmet, a breathing mixture. You're underwater, you can't just get out. I think that psychological parallel is something that we're able to sort of look at focusing on.
So currently, what kind of studies or training services are you providing to prepare either commercial or government astronauts for space travel?
So we're not training anybody at the moment. What we're doing is all the preparatory, and forgive the phraseology about a build project, all the groundwork, the foundations. So we're very fortunate. We employ people who've come from companies like KBR Wiley. We have got ex-astronauts and cosmonauts working with us, ex-European Space Agency folk contributing, and we're taking from the current world of space, as well as from the offshore and underwater sector of offshore industry. We're taking people we would consider to be experts, people who've done it before, people who've worked in that sector, and building what we would like to think and would be an equivalent civilian version of what NASA, the Russian Space Agency, ESA, and offshore energy companies already do. We're intending to send a number of our staff very fortuitously off to work with Oceaneering and NASA at the NBL. So 2 or 3 staff will go there and train, and those 2 or 3 staff will then come back with some NASA Oceaneering people and train the remainder of our trainers. So we would be looking to create an enhanced program for our staff based on the fact that they've been trained by the best, and then we use that almost, if that's the ceiling we want to achieve, we then have got to prove ourselves worthy of people entrusting their time, effort and money with us from a commercial point of view by saying we've now established that ceiling as our floor level. We've got to get better than that. We've got to help develop new training, new processes, new procedures, new safety protocols. So by working with some of those companies, but having our people already trained to that standard, we can hopefully build on them.
Talk to me a little bit about your human health and performance. I imagine you're going to be doing studies, keeping track of the trainees, their health at a baseline in comparison to after their training, and maybe if they in the future fly, are you going to keep track of their health, and that way you have some kind of data that you can make comparisons from?
Absolutely, and that's a very valid point. I think what a commercial company can do, obviously, more perhaps than a government agency would be able to do, because a government agency takes a relatively small, again, forgive the phraseology, a relatively small pool, cadre of people to start with, and from that picks the very best of the best. If we offer, for instance, for a period of time, once it's open, an experience where anybody can come and experience what it's like to train like an astronaut and go through not only the pool, but the parabolic flight and the centrifuge experiences, we potentially get a much wider demographic. People you might think, oh, they'll not do very well, may surprise us. People that you assume would do, fantastically from a fitness or a mental capacity point of view, may find to be more challenged. So that much wider demographic, I think we can use. We're working with companies. So we've already mentioned some. So we've got some staff who are ex-KBR Wiley. There's no point in from the outset suggesting we're better than anybody. We're not. We intend to work with those companies, employ people from those companies, look to do some job sharing where appropriate, give people a bit of variety. And then there are new companies, Advancing X in the US, so what we're doing is the pragmatic hands-on training. Here is a capsule, here is the pool, here is a parabolic flight, here is the centrifuge. But there are companies and organizations with history in doing the sort of human factor studies, the psychological studies. And if we combine all of that, then I think we genuinely can, create something that's more democratic in terms of being able to be translated for more people. Astronaut training tends to be, as I said, for the very few of the very few. And we want to make it a much more democratic opportunity. I suspect SpaceX and Blue Origin would like that as well, and Virgin Galactic. So we work with those people to give as many people the opportunity to experience it, us to learn, and then be able to use that as an initiative way to say, okay, it's one thing to do an experience and you liked it and you sort of did well. But part of our recommendation to the people you said you want to go up with is you need to be aware that this individual has a propensity, for instance, they don't like tight spaces. If they get very warm, they tend to get upset. We need to be cognizant of the fact that if anybody comes through our training facility, when you go on to say, I want to fly to space, you haven't just said, I've got the training, therefore I'm capable of flying. I think there's that question mark between saying somebody's done the training and got the tick and being absolutely capable. I equate it to saying to somebody, if you're a scuba diver, you understand the sense, but would you be, as a scuba diver, comfortable going tomorrow to 150 meters, so 400 feet nearly, 350 feet on mixed gas at night and doing a RET penetration? Somebody would probably, hold on, that's a different order of magnitude. And we want to use the same sort of approach and philosophy.
It seems to me that your company is filling in a niche or a gap that exists right now with the popularity of going commercial for space travel. Because, if an astronaut is at NASA or Roscosmos or JAXA or ESA, they get the training there. But it seems with the push for commercial travel, it seems like your company can assist in preparing people for this commercial travel, which it seems that maybe the SpaceX and the Virgin Galactics and maybe the Blue Origins of the world still haven't set that up yet. Is that where your intention is?
Absolutely, and I think there's three things that we see. So there's an experience you can come and have here on Earth, going through effectively what would be the same ingredients that an astronaut would go through, obviously in a very condensed format, in a much less intense way. But you can do that as an experience. I'm not intending to travel into space, but I've donned the suit, I've been in the pool, I've been in a parabolic flight experience, I've been in a centrifuge, I've had an experience. Then there's that whole commercial sector, which is obviously very kindly highlighted, is opening up. Virgin Galactic, I think, is a very sort of, their talk about what they're offering is very sort of, it's this length of time. You'll be weightless for a fairly short period of time within that. But when you get to people like Blue Origin and SpaceX and what Blue Origin, I suspect, will come out with shortly, and the opportunity, for instance, of companies offering space hotels, there will be a widening of the people who say, actually, I've had an experience, and now there's an opportunity to go into space. I want to be a commercial person. I want to go into space. I absolutely think, and in fact, that commercial sector, Anna, will open up. Who's going to work on a space hotel? Who's going to do the maintenance for that space hotel from a private perspective? There'll be jobs aplenty, I think, going forward in space. But also from a government perspective, either people that have owned the human spaceflight roles in the past. So NASA, Roscosmos, the Chinese, obviously aided and abetted like people by the European Space Agency, JAXA, etc., the Canadian Space Agency. I think the appeal to them would be to say, in the case of the NBL was never originally intended to be a pool, as a warehouse for other bits and pieces, and they built the NBL in there. I think that it's, for the number of government astronauts that are trained, I think NASA would probably be, I'm offering a sort of an opinion here, but where they say, look, we have to maintain this facility. We know what we're doing here, but does this facility now, for instance, match our aspirations post-ISS? If we had a pool which had different features and facilities or equipment around it, for instance, would that suit our purpose more? And so I think our appeal will be to governments to say, effectively like they're doing with and SpaceX and Blue Origin approving the pathway, we don't want to own the facility anymore. We don't want to own the rocket. We will say, okay, that meets our requirements. I'll fly 5 missions a year. You provide me a rocket to fly 5 missions a year. And SpaceX, Blue Origin, others, United Launch Alliance will say, okay, we will provide you the rocket to achieve that mission. And I think we will be doing a similar approach to those space agents. We are designing the pool to cater for, from a marine to space perspective, yes, but to government astronaut and government agencies to say, this matches your requirement for the period of time you need it throughout a year, for the number of years you require it, we will maintain this facility to be more than capable. And so instead of having down periods of time, we can fill in the time when there aren't government astronauts, with commercial astronauts, with experiences, with a whole manner of other skills that keep our staff in tip-top shape. So I think that would be part of our commercial appeal.
There has been new news over here in the States in the past month or so, and I was wondering what you thought and maybe what you've heard the buzz is over there at UK and aerospace industry professionals about the US government declaring that they're going to be going to the moon in 2024.
Hugely exciting, Anna, hugely exciting. And I would like to hope that we can contribute to that. I mentioned that, whilst we're building the first centre in the UK, we've already had discussions about other centres. I'm not a rocket engineer. Don't let me build any rockets. But I think that rockets for me will eventually, to a degree, perhaps not quite the same, become a bit more like, cars, motorbike, a bit more ubiquitous. You don't necessarily, as a passenger, care what vehicle. When we fly transatlantic, you don't care necessarily. Of course, we'd like to be on the biggest plane and we'd all like to be in first class. But ultimately, what you want is a seat that's comfortable. You're going to get a nice meal that you've asked for and you can watch some entertainment. So the plane per se is not the primary concern. The flight matched our requirements, was at the right price point. And I think for us, it's a similar story. With an aspiration that NASA has put out there, the US has put out there about going to the moon, hugely exciting. I had the privilege of meeting, about a year before he passed away, sadly, Gene Cernan, and I'll come back to him. But listening to him, I'd been doing Blue Abyss for about 9 months, and I've never said this publicly, but I'm now going to break that taboo. After 9 months, I thought, sheesh, what an idiot. Why did I start a project? I put it out there, I'm going to do this. This is madness. And I sat and listened to him give a speech in part of the Houses of Parliament. There's an adjunct building called Portcullis House. And he was angry and at the audience, not individually, you're all stupid or I'm annoyed at you, but more that we as a species, if he was part of the vanguard, those Apollo astronauts genuinely felt we're just the start. It might be hugely exciting and exhilarating and we're the first, but we're just the first of millions potentially of people to travel. And so that I came away and I thought, wow, we are failing. We as a species are naturally curious. It's one of those things that defines humans from other species. We have an innate curiosity and we failed. And I want to tell another story later about him. But that really made me think, I'm going to give it a good go. I might be a private individual with very little background in any of this, but I've had the idea and I'm going to try and see it through.
That's one of the questions I wanted to ask you. Looking at your bio, you've been working for Fortune 100 companies and businesses and finance, and all of a sudden you're working in space. How did that come about?
I wish I was working in space, and it might be easier at times. When I grew up in the Middle East, I learned to swim when I was very young. One of my sisters, one of my two older sisters, threw me into a pool. I can't have been more than about 18 months old, but I was shouting and I was going to tell my mother, and she said, well, you need to get out of the pool to tell her. So I learned to swim quickly. Then we moved to the Middle East, and that, for me, it became part education. I loved living on the beach. I loved going into the sea all the time, opening my eyes. The salt stung, but I just felt at home. And then I got the opportunity to train in the Army, in scuba diving, actually, where I eventually became an instructor. So that reinforced that. The whole world, of course it does, from an audible point of view, just disappears when you go beneath the wave. It just instantly calms me down. And then I'd always maintained an interest in space, from a curious point of view, from watching films. I watched the Apollo-Soyuz link-up in 1975 on TV after we'd just arrived in the UK. So there was always something in the back of my mind about space. And then in 2014, I said, my wife, I can't face going to work in the city anymore. And so she said, right. And I said, I had an idea. And she said, right. And when I told her, I think she was going to, if she'd had a baseball bat, I'd have felt the baseball bat. But anyway, I got away with it. Because for me, the pool was the most comprehensive thing that I was capable of. I don't have a PhD. I don't even have a degree. But I felt that I would be able to conceive of a pool bigger and better than anybody else. Not because size necessarily in of itself was the thing. But I thought, what about the interoperability between offshore energy and space? What about having filmmaking going on at the same time as teaching children to free dive or scuba dive? And so that size thing became important to me because there was all those different opportunities, whether or not they were concurrent or individual. And I thought that, again, for me, we're a marine species on a marine planet. We're becoming much more aware of our heritage on Earth, the amount of plastic in the oceans, for instance, the way that we treat our oceans, the way that we farm them, the energy we take from the planet, without really in the past having had an awareness of the damage, perhaps, that we've been causing.
Yes, of
so
course.
Water's a common theme, right? We're wholly dependent on, but it's the one medium that for prolonged periods of time you can use to replicate three-dimensional movement of space. Of course, it's not total weightlessness, it's not true weightlessness, but it's as close as we're going to get here on Earth for a prolonged period of time. You can do a parabolic flight and you can have a weightless period of time for 25 seconds or so, but that's nothing really compared to hours in a suit going around or living underwater and thinking, wow, I'm on a different planet. And if you add a bit of theatre to that, lighting, virtual, augmented and mixed reality, then I think we've got the grounds for creating a training facility and a research facility par excellence.
So you mentioned that you saw Gene Cernan's speech, and did you wish you could have asked him something specific about his travels in space?
Thank you, and well teed up there. Just at the end of the talk, I thought, wow, that was really, genuinely, it made me, hairs on the back of my neck stand up. And then somebody leant over and said, would you like to meet him? Well, I thought, well, I'm 7 years old and I'm right at the front of the queue. So I lined up with everybody else. And then it sort of dawned on me, what am I going to say to a guy who walked on the moon? He's going to say, I'm thinking he's going to say, you're a nice guy, but you're a raving idiot. Which might be right, actually. But anyway, I got to the front of the queue and I'm thinking, what am I going to say to a guy who walked on the moon? I'm building a pool. I want to build an astronaut train. So I shook him by the hand and everything slowed down. I genuinely thought I was 7 years old, frankly. He just loomed over me. I don't think he loomed over me. He had a huge handshake. It was firm, and I just felt calm. And I said, this is what I'm attempting to do, sir. And he said to me, he just summed it up perfectly. Typically for him, he just summed it up perfectly. He said, so you're building a facility. And I quote, this is absolutely, Anna, it's etched, you can put it on my gravestone. He said, that's amazing, never give up. And at that moment I was split between thinking, oh, can't ever give up now. Don't wash your hand, because I've shaken his hand with that hand. But it was a real boost. Now, the preceding nearly 5 years have been, and had their ups and downs. There have been no end of challenges, no end of doubters, and no end of issues to overcome. Credibility, perhaps one of those. But I'm very grateful with the team we've got around us, the astronauts we've had supporters, the industries and build partners, people like you taking their time, that we've managed to get this far. I am convinced, Anna, that with persistence and with clarity of vision and passion, we will absolutely deliver on the vision we want. It's a low-level initiative. I don't doubt it. It's a pool. I'll give you the dimensions if you want.
Well, I definitely believe that you're on to something, because in the past year, it's just taken off the popularity and the advances in further space travel, not just in LEO, and commercializing it, but the popularity of finally getting the drive to go back to the moon and Mars. And as you explained to me earlier in our conversations, the importance of human-centered design and human factors, and making sure that the human is properly trained and understanding what their body is going through when they're in that environment.
Well, yeah, absolutely, Anna, because I was at a conference once and a colleague of mine was on a stage with somebody who said, just imagine a time, we were talking, the theme of the conference seemed to be more around AI. So we were probably an odd participant to a degree, but my colleague Simon Ebbets was on the stage. And this chap said, imagine a time when we can develop a chip, and it was either Total Recall or The Matrix personified. He said you could just, you want to be in a Western, you plug it in the back of your head and there you are. And I thought, sign me out of that. I don't want to plug in a chip anywhere. If I want to be a cowboy, trust me, I could dress up like one, go ride a horse and pretend to be. That surely is the defining experience. We can send rovers to Mars and Chinese rovers on the far side of the moon and Israeli landers attempting to get to the moon. Wow, hugely exciting. But I would like to go. I'm sure there are thousands of other people who'd like to go.
Yeah.
That's what and so there is a huge step. I think it's been slightly played down by some organisations. I think it's been missed perhaps by the general public who don't recognise. But you speak to any astronaut, from Anna Lee Fisher to Scott Parazinski to Dorian Prenario, Tim Peake, Helen Sharman, Leroy Chow, they will tell you, Nicole Stott, they will tell you, training is absolutely fundamental. Now, of course, they do a very, 18 months of very focused, we're going on a mission. Mm-hmm. So I don't know that members of the general public would stomach 18 months for a 1 week experience, but you sort of draws a parallel that you need to be prepared. I want to go, I want to enjoy myself, I want to be prepared for the good and the bad, and God forbid if there's anything goes wrong. And the only way to do that, Anna, like we talked about scuba diving, is to get some thorough training. And so I think we absolutely, it may be a low-level initiative, but it will become a foundation initiative in terms of, if we all want to go to space, you need to get trained to do it.
Yes, certainly. I have a couple of questions for you on a personal level. As we go further into this digital era, sometimes we're more connected to each other, but again,
Yes.
we're not at a
Yes.
human level, right?
Yes.
In either in your professional or personal life, have you connected with someone who has altered the course of your life?
So I'm going to use Gene Cernan again, if I may, Anna. That's a bit rich to use him twice. But so I'd already had the idea before I met Gene. And actually another chap, Scott Parazinski, was influential. But I had the idea before I spoke to Scott. In Gene Cernan's case, there was this historical figure who I felt a veneration of, who just absolutely, at a time when I hadn't been doing it very long, and I admit candidly, in the military, you were sort of trained, don't give up, it's going to get harder, you've got to dig in, and we have some military sayings about, head down and just keep going. And this experience has been like that. And 9 months in is not very long, right? But to already be thinking, this was a stupid idea. To have somebody like Gene Cernan encapsulate everything I felt in, you're building you're building a facility, that's amazing, never give up. But he looked at me and I felt a real wow. And in the lowest point since, when there have been, this is just difficult, why we've been, the attempts at scamming to investments, and there's a whole plethora of things that happen in the course of setting up a business. That one kernel has stayed with me. I'd love to have met one other person, and it happens to be an astronaut. I would love to have met Neil Armstrong. I watched First Man on the Moon recently. Just a quiet, self-effacing, competent person who shrugged to a degree the limelight and the longevity of it, just to go back and become a high, university professor. I would love to just connect with somebody, go for a walk, speak to them about how, why. We're all on individual journeys. We're all trying to emulate people. We're all busy to fit in when we're all born to stand out and to be individuals. But it would be lovely to get some sense of what he felt, why, what those moments were. Did he have doubts? What was the polar opposite of that? My own father died when I was 7. He was killed in a car crash. So I never had the chance to really learn from a father figure as such, although one of my brother-in-laws was killed in the Falklands War and won Britain's highest military award, the Victoria Cross. Now, I grew up with Ian very closely. I felt like his brother, and he was a huge influence in me, and I've always aspired to be as strong and resilient as him. So, there are some historical figures, male figures typically, who I wish I'd had more time with. But those that I have had time with, Gene Cernan, albeit for a few minutes, made a huge difference.
So now let me turn it around. Do you know of an instance where you have influenced someone in a significant manner?
I'm sort of hesitating, Anna, because I don't think I have. I'd love to have felt that I'd made a slight difference in somebody's life. I've had some incidents where I've been able to help people who've been in trouble, medically in trouble. I gave a talk on behalf of an organisation at a school 15 months ago or something, and a young man afterwards, I was telling the story about how when my father died, for instance, in the Middle East, we used to get up very early, 5 a.m. I always had breakfast. On this one particular occasion, I didn't get up, and my father went to work, was killed on the journey. And it just caused a momentary sort of, glitch in the speech that I prepared, bless. And at the end of it, this young man came up to me and said, I'm not trying to suggest it's a deprived school, but it's a school in probably a less salubrious area than other parts of the UK. And he said to me, it was the most insightful question I've ever had. And he said, do you think you succeeded because of the setbacks? And that made me think. And I said, I actually don't know, but that's a very insightful question. And then I tried to turn around and say, well, how do you think it will help you? So has that opportunity to connect with one individual made a difference to that one individual? I don't know. That one chat with Gene Cernan made a difference to me. I always like to think that I go through life. I'm sure I've done no end of wrong things. I try not to regret them. What can I do about them now? But I'd love to think that if I've made one tiny, tiny, minuscule difference to one person's life, a military person leaving the services have benefited perhaps because I've helped them network with somebody else, then I've made the positive mark I would like.
Well, it seems to me like you're in the beginning stages of impacting a whole bunch of people and making a significant difference in the world of aerospace. I think what you guys are doing is certainly going to be helpful, and it's going to become an integral part of training and preparation for commercial space travel. So I'm looking forward to following what you all accomplish and how far you get and how involved you get with either the private industry or government. I don't know about ESA and the UK Space Agency, but here at NASA, we always struggle with budget cuts. It's a reality. There are other expenses that governments have, and sometimes space travel falls, lower in priority. And, it's definitely something a company like yours can help with.
Well, Emma, that's very kind of you to say. I would love to be part of the story of helping humanity reach out beyond the planet and become, as I said at the beginning, it's a marine to space business. So to help young people, old people, I don't mean just old people, but, all ages of people become more aware and gain an insight and an affinity to the planet we live on. By coming to learn to dive, by coming and experiencing what it's like to go under in a submersible in the pool, or develop technology for capturing plastic. But if we can help governments by being more cost effective, more up to date, more responsive, more fleet of foot, then that absolutely plays to the sweet spot we believe we're creating. And I absolutely want to be part of the vanguard that helps establish commercial spaceflight, but opens up the experience to more people. That for me would be a huge testimony to something positive we've contributed.
And I know you all are on social media. You're on Facebook, right? And
we are.
And LinkedIn
and Twitter, and wherever else. I think we probably don't do enough of it, but we're there, and I think it's Blue Abyss.
And you have a beautiful website, by the way. Love
That's
the website.
Thank you. Nothing to do with me. Silk Pierce.
For those who are listening and might be curious in different areas, I assume you're still looking for investors and contributors or partners.
We're always looking, and I'm always interested in. You talked about human connectivity a minute ago. Mm-hmm. I'm always interested in dialogue. It doesn't matter whether you've got a skill set you think might be appropriate, looking for a role, want to leave a legacy, want to contribute, have an idea. We're open to those conversations, because we're not just going to be in the UK. We want to establish a global footprint eventually. So whatever conversations are appropriate for people, I'd welcome the opportunity to have those.
And as far as staffing goes, are you looking for anybody in particular with specific skills?
We're very lucky because of the people we've already got working with us, and some of the people we've identified. But yeah, so as much as it's probably the aspirational part of the business, the space side we're relatively comfortable with. The diving side will open up because we're going to recruit 35 staff to come and be the diving staff at the pool. The first two or three of those will go off to Houston to train. But, research, medical people, so hyper and hyperbaric chambers we'll be building at the pool and then our other centre in North Wales. We're just open to opportunity of people who, like me, and I don't have a background, I don't even have a degree, I didn't finish higher education. I left school at 16 and joined the army. I don't think what you've done is necessarily a precursor to what you're capable of doing. And so we're interested in people with the right attitude, not just the right qualifications.
Okay, excellent. Well, we'll ask our followers to keep track and see, your successes, and maybe somebody out there listening to this can help you in your mission to make a difference and make commercial space travel more available to folks and be prepared for the experience.
Anna, that would be hugely welcome. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you, and have a great weekend over there in England.
Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of the day in the US.